It's good to see you today. Hope everything is going well. It is January 11th. Our reading today comes from Genesis chapter 30. In Genesis chapter 30, we're looking at verses 25 on through chapter 31. Looks like the entirety of chapter 31. And it is the account of when Jacob is serving Laban. As yesterday we spoke a little bit about Jacob fleeing from Esau, and then he gets to Laban, and you have the whole Leah and Rachel account. But to get over at our passage, I wanted to begin in verse 42 as Jacob is serving Laban, and he's been there a number of years. We'll talk about it here in just a moment. But at verse 43, thus the man, and that would be Jacob, thus the man became exceedingly prosperous and had large flocks, female and male servants, camels and donkeys. And as this was happening, as Jacob was becoming prosperous, exceedingly prosperous, Laban was becoming exceedingly impoverished. And to look at chapter 31 now. Now Jacob heard the words of Laban's sons, saying, Jacob has taken away all that was our father's, and from what was our father's he has acquired all this wealth. Jacob saw the countenance of Laban, and indeed it was not favorable toward him as before, you don't say. And the Lord said to Jacob, Return to the land of your fathers, and to your family, and I will be with you. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to the field, to his flock, and said to them, I see your father's countenance, that it is not favorable toward me as before, but the God of my father has been with me. And you know that with all my might I have served your father. Excuse me. Yet your father has deceived me and changed my wages 10 times, but God did not allow him to hurt me. Let's begin with this. We know later on in the account, Jacob had been serving Laban for 20 years. Do you think Jacob in a million years ever thought that when he fled from Esau, do you think Jacob ever thought that it would be 2 decades before he came back? Do you think he ever thought it'd be 2 decades? It'd be 20 years. We say this, what is 20 years to the Lord? The Lord had told Jacob, I'm going to bring you back. Well, okay, how long is that going to take? What, a month, 2 months, 6 months, a year? 20 years. But does the Lord keep his promises? The Lord keeps his promises. 20 years. What is 20 years to the Lord? What's 1,000 years to the Lord? For Jacob, as he served, he'd been serving for 2 decades. And what he says is, God had been with him for those 20 years. He tells his wives, Laban's daughters, he says, your father has deceived me and changed my wages 10 times, but God did not allow him to hurt me. God had been with him. And he specifically mentions it later on as well. God was with him. And that's how it is with us. We may be facing horrible situations. We may be facing perilous circumstances. But is the Lord with us? As we are with the Lord, draw near unto God, and God will draw near unto you. God had been with Jacob. It was a hard situation. Laban had changed his wages umpteen different times. And from what Jacob says, you can tell the sort of fellow Laban was. God did not allow him to hurt me. He was no longer looking favorably at Jacob. Laban's sons say, you can tell, this isn't good. It's not a good situation. And these fellows probably would have had no qualms about hurting Jacob. But God had been with him. God is with us. But we will say this. Jacob had been deceived. He'd been deceived multiple times. He had been deceived into marrying Leah. And he says, your father has changed my wages all these times. Remember what Jacob means. Jacob means the supplanter. And some people make the point, and I think it's a good point, the deceiver. The deceiver was being deceived. Sometimes, because I do think looking at Jacob's life, Jacob is changing. Jacob is becoming Israel. And sometimes what it takes for us to change is to be confronted with our own sins. And sometimes we don't see our own sins unless we see the same things that we've done in the life of others. The deceiver was being deceived. Here's the short way of saying it. Jacob was getting a taste of his own medicine. Jacob had deceived his own father. He's getting a taste of his own medicine. Now, how much do you think he likes it? And do you think that played a part in his changing and in being faithful? The deceiver was being deceived, had been deceived. God had been with him, and Jacob's on this journey, and it's the journey that we're all on as we all strive to grow in grace and knowledge. He's getting a taste of his own medicine. I think one of the points we can make about the account is, again, it's about choices. And when Laban chases after him, because Rachel is going to steal, as Rachel and Leah choose to go with Jacob. But Rachel is going to steal the household idols. Well, when Laban runs after them, chases after them, and finally catches up to them, Laban says, you should have let me say goodbye to my children. But he also mentions, why did you steal my gods? Now, the Lord had spoken to Laban. The Lord had told Laban, if I can get my fingers to work. The Lord had told Laban, look over later on in chapter 31. Chapter 31 at about verse 24. God had come to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night and said to him, be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad. Laban overtakes Jacob. Laban says to Jacob, what have you done? You've stolen away unknown to me and carried away my daughters like captives, taken with a sword. Why did you flee away secretly? Why have you done all this? It is in my power, verse 29, to do you harm, but the God of your fathers spoke to me last night, saying, be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad. Now you have done all this. Jacob says, I did this because I was afraid. But verse 30, Laban says, why did you steal my gods? Here's my question. Laban, why don't you try worshiping the God who's actually talking to you? Those gods that Rachel stole, and you're saying, why did you steal my gods? Have those gods ever spoken to you? Have those gods ever said anything? But the God of Jacob spoke to you that night and said, don't do anything don't do anything you're going to regret. It's about choices. And as Laban and Jacob part company, it's about choices. And Jacob's choosing the right way. And Laban and Jacob separate. It's been a recurring theme as we've gone through Genesis, frankly. It's about choices. It's about free will. And Jacob's making the right choices. God is with them. And as they go back, Jacob is choosing God. Laban, he was looking for his gods. Anyway, a lot of folks, they're just interested in their gods who haven't ever said anything to them. We have to make better choices. Hope this study's been beneficial for you. Appreciate you. Hope you have a good day, and we'll see you tomorrow.